The evening of our anniversary had a strange stillness before it fully began, like the pause between the sharp intake of breath and the sound of a storm breaking. The house was already filled with the low hum of anticipation, the smell of roasted meats from the kitchen, the faint sweetness of the cake cooling on the counter, the shuffle of chairs being arranged in the dining hall. Everything was in its place, perfectly staged for celebration. I wanted to believe it would be a night to remember for joy, not for something else. But then her phone lit up. It was only for a second. A quick vibration against the polished wood of the side table, the screen flashing with a notification. I hadn't meant to look, but my eyes landed on it the way you notice a spark in a dark room. A name. A man's name. And after it, a small red heart. In that moment, something shifted inside me. Lindsay reached for the phone with a speed that didn't match the casual mask she tried to put on. She tucked it against her side, turned the screen downward, and laughed softly, too softly, as though the laugh itself might erase what I'd seen. But it was too late. I had caught the detail, and more than the detail, I caught the look in her eyes when she glanced at me. The flicker of alarm, the calculation, the effort to craft a story. "It's just a colleague," she said, her voice carrying that falsely light tone she used whenever she was already on the defensive. "He was only sending congratulations early." The words felt like they had been pulled out of her by force, as though she'd rehearsed them in her head but hoped never to have to say them aloud. They were neat, too neat, and so controlled that they revealed more than they covered. What I noticed most wasn't the explanation, but her face. She tried to keep it neutral, but the muscles around her mouth tightened. The skin at the corner of her eyes stiffened. And yet, there had been that smile, the kind of smile you can't fake. A smile born out of something warm, something int asterisk mate. A smile that didn't belong to me. I stood frozen, holding a wine glass that felt suddenly too heavy in my hand. My fingers gripped the stem as though it might anchor me, but it didn't. The air between us thickened. She looked at me once more, then quickly looked away, as though to move the moment past us before it could grow teeth. And then the first guests arrived. The front door opened with cheerful voices, coats rustling, perfume mingling with the faint scent of polished wood and flowers arranged in vases around the room. Lindsay straightened instantly, as though flipping a switch. She set her phone aside, raised her chin, and transformed into the perfect hostess. The woman who laughed easily, who guided people toward their seats, who touched shoulders and made everyone feel welcome. I watched her glide across the room, her black dress flowing with each step, her smile polished to a shine. To everyone else, she was radiant. To me, that radiance had already fractured. I wanted to confront her then, to grab the phone, to show everyone what I had seen. But the rational part of me whispered that maybe I was wrong, that maybe I was twisting an innocent moment into something darker because of my own insecurities. I told myself to wait, to breathe, to observe. And yet, as Lindsay raised her glass for the first toast of the evening, her hands steady and her eyes sparkling in the candlelight, I noticed the faintest tremor in her other hand, the one holding her phone under the tablecloth. Her thumb brushed across the screen as if checking, replying, deleting. No one else saw it, but I did. The laughter of our friends rang out, clinking glasses, voices blending into a chorus of celebration. But inside me there was no laughter. There was only silence, the kind of silence that grows when truth presses against the walls of denial. As she sipped her wine, her eyes briefly swept the room, then landed on me. For half a second, the practiced ease faltered. It was like watching a mask slip, just a fraction of an inch, revealing the tension underneath. She recovered quickly, smiling as if nothing had happened, but I had seen it, and I realized, standing there among family and friends, that this anniversary wasn't a celebration of what we had built together. It was the beginning of something else entirely, the tearing down of illusions I had clung to for far too long. The music grew louder as the night unfolded, violins from the hired quartet blending with the chatter of guests and the clink of glasses. Toasts followed one after another, some heartfelt, others heavy with wine. From the outside, it was everything an anniversary should be: elegant, filled with laughter, warm light flickering across crystal glasses and polished silver. Yet I found myself standing slightly apart, near the edge of the hall, as though I were no longer part of the celebration. My body was present, my hands occasionally clapping along to a speech, my lips curving into a practiced smile when someone caught my eye. But my mind was elsewhere, slipping backward into the shadows of recent months, stitching together the fragments of unease I had tried so hard to ignore. It began with the late evenings. At first, Lindsay would text me around 6, saying she had to stay at work longer than expected. Deadlines, she said. Reports that had to be finalized. Meetings that had run over. I accepted it because what else was I supposed to do? We were both professionals and sometimes work bled into nights. But then the late evenings turned into routine, and routine turned into habit. 11 o'clock would strike, and she'd walk through the door smelling faintly not of her office, but of perfume I didn't recognize. Light, expensive, lingering in the air long after she'd kissed me absent-mindedly on the cheek. Then there were the girls' nights. She'd announce them with a casual wave of her hand, slipping into her newest dress, curling her hair with more care than she used to. She always said she was just meeting friends, and yet she never invited me along, never told me exactly where they were meeting. When I asked, she would laugh and say, "It's just the usual places, nothing exciting." But her tone was always dismissive, as though I were the unreasonable one for even wondering. Sometimes she wouldn't return until after midnight, her heels clicking sharply against the tiles of the foyer, her cheeks flushed as if she had been running or laughing too hard. Her explanation was always the same: we lost track of time. And yet, her eyes carried a spark that had nothing to do with wine or friends. I remembered the new dresses too. They began appearing in the closet without warning. Elegant, form-fitting, more daring than the clothes she used to choose. She said they were gifts to herself, small indulgences. But I noticed how quickly they rotated into her evenings out, while the comfortable sweaters and old jeans stayed folded, untouched. The Lindsay I knew had always been practical, sometimes even frugal, proud of making her wardrobe last. Now she seemed to reinvent herself in silk and satin, as if dressing for someone new. The phone was the clearest sign, though I hadn't wanted to admit it. She started leaving it face down on every surface: the kitchen table, the nightstand, the arm of the couch. At first I thought nothing of it, but then I noticed the pattern. The phone never rested with the screen up. Notifications would vibrate quietly, muffled against wood, unseen. And whenever she did pick it up, she would tilt her body slightly away, angling the screen toward herself and away from me. The calls were always short, whispered, often taken in the bathroom or out on the balcony. She'd step outside into the night, her silhouette framed by the sliding glass door, voice low and hurried. Once, I caught her laughing softly, a laugh that was free and light, the kind of laugh I hadn't heard directed at me in a long time. When I asked later who it had been, she brushed it off. Just a friend. Always just a friend. I should have seen it then. Even her laughter with me had changed. Around me it became tight, controlled, as though she were always weighing how much to give. The warmth that once spilled out of her naturally was gone, replaced with a careful performance. And yet, whenever she thought I wasn't listening, I'd hear her voice on the phone, brighter, lighter, carrying tones of an asterisk Macy I no longer recognized. There had been one night, not long ago, when I climbed into her car to fetch a folder I'd forgotten at the office. On the back seat, half hidden beneath a scarf, was a receipt. It was from a restaurant across town. Not the kind of place you'd visit casually, but the kind you booked weeks in advance. 2 entrees, a bottle of wine, dessert. I asked her about it later, and she laughed, saying she had gone there with coworkers after a long meeting. But when I pressed for details, her answers faltered. She couldn't remember what she had eaten, couldn't name who else had been there. At the time, I told myself it was nothing, that I was inventing problems because of stress, because of fear, because I couldn't stand the idea of losing her. I wanted to believe in her so badly that I made excuses on her behalf. I told myself that everyone keeps some parts of themselves private, that not every unexplained detail is evidence of betrayal. But standing there at our anniversary, with the music echoing around me and her phone still within arm's reach, I could no longer escape the truth. All those fragments, the late nights, the laughter, the dresses, the whispers, they aligned now, forming a picture too sharp to ignore. The cruelest part was realizing that my instincts had tried to warn me all along. Each time I'd pushed them down, told myself I was paranoid, that I needed to trust her. But trust isn't meant to feel like a battle against yourself. Trust is supposed to be easy, natural. And mine had been eroding grain by grain without me admitting it. As I stood there, holding my glass, watching Lindsay move effortlessly through the crowd of our friends, I felt the weight of those memories pressing down on me. They weren't vague suspicions anymore. They were alarms I had silenced, warnings I had ignored. Now, in the glow of candlelight and champagne, with her polished smile flashing across the room, I saw the truth of them all. The signs had been there for months. I just hadn't wanted to face them. The night had already unfolded into a blur of speeches, laughter, and clinking glasses when the dancing began. Couples moved to the center of the hall, the music swelling as though determined to carry everyone into celebration. I stood at the edge of the room, watching Lindsay twirl gracefully, her dress catching the light, her laughter rising above the melody. To anyone else, she looked like the embodiment of joy, the center of attention. But to me, her every movement felt like a performance. Flawless on the surface, hollow underneath. And then the door opened. It was a small gesture, hardly noticed at first. The quiet swing of polished wood, the faint chill of night air drifting inside. But my eyes caught the figure that stepped into the hall. A tall man, broad-shouldered, his suit perfectly tailored, his stride confident. I recognized him instantly, though I had never truly met him. He was the name on her phone. The name with a heart. The colleague. For a moment, I thought I must be imagining it, that perhaps my mind, already twisted by suspicion, was conjuring him into existence. But then I saw her. Lindsay froze. Her laughter faltered mid-note. Her body stiffened as though someone had cut the strings of a puppet. For a second, her carefully built facade cracked wide open. She hadn't expected him to come here, not tonight, not to this space filled with friends and family. Her eyes darted toward him, and in that instant, everything else in the room faded. She moved toward him too quickly, as though pulled by a magnet. Her hand brushed against her dress nervously, her face breaking into a smile she didn't even bother disguising. It was not the polite smile she had offered to every guest tonight, not the careful mask she wore as a wife. It was raw, unguarded, a smile of recognition, of an asterisk Macy. And then, in front of everyone, he placed his hand on her waist. It was brief, no more than a few seconds, his fingers resting lightly against the curve of her body. But it was enough. Enough to strip away every excuse she had ever given, every deflection, every laugh that tried to silence my doubts. The gesture was small in the way lightning is small. Quick, fleeting, but devastating in its clarity. I felt the blood rush to my ears, the weight of the room pressing down on me. The guests barely noticed at first, some still laughing, some still clapping to the rhythm of the music. But my world had narrowed into that single image. Her body leaning slightly toward his hand claiming space that had once belonged to me alone, her smile betraying everything she had denied. Time slowed. I remembered the messages, the late nights, the whispered phone calls. I remembered the scent of cologne on her coat, the receipt hidden under a scarf, the excuses that never added up. All of it culminated in this moment, in the physical proof I had been too afraid to demand. I thought of stepping forward, of grabbing her arm, of dragging the truth into the light in front of everyone. A scene burned through my imagination. Me shouting accusations, her denying them, the crowd gasping as the perfect marriage crumbled before their eyes. But I didn't move, couldn't. The weight of betrayal pressed me into silence. Instead, I stood there and watched as she leaned closer, whispering something to him I couldn't hear. Her voice was low, her eyes shimmering not with shame but with a spark that hadn't been there for me in years. He nodded, his lips curving into the kind of smirk that comes only from confidence. The confidence of a man who believes he has already won. My glass shook in my hand. The wine inside rippled, threatening to spill over the rim. I tightened my grip until my knuckles whitened, forcing myself to breathe. The music played on, violins swelling, oblivious to the quiet collapse of a marriage happening in plain sight. I scanned the faces around the room. A few had noticed. My brother, standing near the bar, frowned as his gaze shifted between me and Lindsay. An older aunt raised her eyebrows, whispering something to the person beside her. Most of the guests, though, were too wrapped up in their own revelry to see what had just unfolded. For now, the shame was mine alone. But I knew the truth could not stay hidden. The proof was no longer tucked away in receipts or muffled through closed doors. It was standing in front of me, breathing the same air, wearing the same confident smile. It was in the way her body softened under his touch, the way her eyes lit up when they found his. There was no explanation she could give that would undo what I had seen. I thought of confronting him, of marching across the room and demanding answers. But what good would it have done? The proof was already there. Words were unnecessary. His presence said it all, her reaction confirmed it. Confrontation would only give him more power, more satisfaction in seeing me unravel. So I stayed still, swallowing the anger that burned in my chest, feeling it settle into something colder, sharper. Rage could wait. What mattered now was clarity. For months, I had doubted myself, questioned whether I was imagining things. Now, I no longer needed to wonder. She had betrayed me, and the whole room was beginning to see it. As the music shifted into another song, Lindsay tried to compose herself, smoothing her dress, forcing laughter that didn't reach her eyes. She pulled away slightly from him, but the damage was already done. No distance could erase the int asterisk Macy I had just witnessed. No act could cover the truth that had revealed itself with the simplicity of a hand on her waist. And in that moment, I knew my marriage was no longer mine. It belonged to secrets, to lies, to the man who had walked so confidently through that door. When the moment of proof settled inside me like ice, I knew I couldn't react the way everyone expected. The old me might have erupted, shouting, demanding explanations, breaking the illusion of our anniversary in a storm of accusations. But as I stood there, wine glass trembling in my hand, a strange calm overtook me. The kind of calm that comes not from peace but from devastation so complete it leaves nothing left to burn. I set the glass down quietly on a nearby table and slipped away from the crowd. No one noticed at first. The music was too loud, the laughter too thick, the masks of celebration too distracting. I moved into the next room, where the air was cooler, quieter, carrying only the faint echo of the festivities. My hand went instinctively to my pocket, to the phone that now felt like both a wee *p*n and a shield. I didn't plan it, at least not consciously. But the moment Lindsay's betrayal was no longer just suspicion. Something old inside me stirred. A memory, a person, a possibility I had buried long ago. Her name surfaced in my mind like a whisper. Melanie. Melanie had been part of my life once, though not in the way Lindsay always believed. We had grown close years ago, close enough that people assumed there was more between us. But there never had been. What existed between us was unspoken. A connection, a recognition, a pull that neither of us acted on. I had chosen Lindsay, convinced myself that choice was the right one, and in doing so, I had closed the door on what might have been with Melanie. But Lindsay never forgot her. She saw shadows where there were none, accusing glances, subtle threats. Melanie became the name Lindsay would spit out whenever she wanted to remind me of the dangers of temptation, though I had never crossed that line. Ironically, the woman who accused me of being unfaithful in my heart had been the one carrying betrayal in her own. Now, standing alone in the dim light of the adjoining room, I unlocked my phone and scrolled to her name. My thumb hovered over it for a moment, trembling. I wasn't sure if I was reaching out for revenge, for comfort, or for clarity. Perhaps all three. But I pressed the screen anyway, and the message formed in seconds. Can you come? The 3 dots appeared almost instantly, pulsing like a heartbeat. Then her reply. Where are you? I typed the address. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. An hour later, The celebration was still roaring in the hall. Guests were deep in conversation, drinks flowing freely, the music spilling into the night. Lindsay continued her performance, her laughter louder than ever, as though she believed that if she played her role convincingly enough, the crack in the facade could be glued shut. And then the front door opened again. Melanie stepped inside. She wore a black dress, simple yet striking, the kind of dress that didn't scream for attention but drew it all the same. Her presence was magnetic, her confidence unshaken by the curious stares that immediately turned her way. Conversations faltered, glasses paused midair, eyes shifted from her to Lindsay and back again. I felt the ripple spread through the room like a silent wave. People sensed it instantly, even if they didn't understand. Here was a woman who didn't belong to the occasion but belonged to me in a way no one could articulate. Lindsay's gaze found her across the room. For the first time that evening, her mask shattered completely. The smile vanished from her lips, her posture faltered, and in her eyes flickered something I had not seen all night. Fear. Real, raw fear. She knew who Melanie was. She knew what her presence meant. I didn't move toward Melanie immediately. I let the moment breathe, let the contrast hang in the air. Lindsay standing beside the man whose hand had claimed her waist earlier, her confidence crumbling, while Melanie's steady poise filled the room like quiet thunder. Finally, I stepped forward. Not toward Lindsay, not toward the man, toward Melanie. The air shifted. The guests, who had been pretending not to notice the tension all evening, could no longer look away. The room held its breath as I greeted her, the warmth in my voice undeniable. Her eyes softened, meeting mine with an understanding that required no explanation. We hadn't spoken in years, yet the connection was immediate, unbroken, as if time had only sharpened it. I didn't touch her hand, didn't embrace her. I didn't need to. The simple act of her standing there, by invitation, was enough to tilt the entire night on its axis. Lindsay's confidence collapsed in front of everyone. She tried to laugh, to wave it off, to regain her composure, but her eyes betrayed her. The man beside her shifted awkwardly, suddenly less certain of his place. He stepped back half a pace, as though the room itself rejected him. And in that moment, I saw the balance of power change. For months, I had been the one on edge, doubting myself, questioning my worth, suffocating under the suspicion of her secrets. Now it was Lindsay who stood exposed, her perfect performance unraveling, her audience watching the truth bleed through. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't caused a scene. I hadn't accused her. All I had done was open a door and let someone in. Someone whose presence alone shattered the illusion Lindsay thought she controlled. That was the move she hadn't expected. The air in the hall had shifted. What had begged *N as a celebration. An evening of clinking glasses, polite laughter, and carefully orchestrated joy, now hummed with something rawer, unspoken, but undeniable. Melanie's arrival had fractured the balance. I could feel it in the silence that spread each time the music dipped, in the way conversations stumbled into awkward pauses, in the way people's eyes darted from Lindsay to me to Melanie, piecing together their own conclusions. Lindsay tried to recover. She straightened her posture, forced her lips into a smile that looked brittle and wrong, and even reached for the man's arm as though clutching at an anchor. But it didn't work. Everyone had seen her freeze when Melanie appeared. Everyone had noticed the tension that rippled across her face, a crack in the flawless performance she had worn all evening. I stood at the edge of the room, watching it unfold. For the first time in months, I wasn't the one on trial in my own mind. The doubt that had gnawed at me had transformed into certainty. Proof had already been delivered when that man's hand found her waist. But Melanie's presence made it undeniable, public, impossible for Lindsay to bury beneath lies. Then the toasts began. One of our friends, half drunk and cheerful, tapped a spoon against his glass, calling for silence. "A few words for the happy couple," he announced, slurring only slightly. A chorus of agreement followed, and before I could retreat, the eyes of the room turned toward me. Someone pressed the microphone into my hand. I held it loosely, feeling its weight, hearing the faint buzz of feedback as it activated. My reflection stared back at me from the polished glass of the dining hall's windows. A man pale, tired, holding truths too heavy to hide any longer. For a long moment I said nothing. I let the silence stretch, the guests leaning forward in anticipation. Lindsay fidgeting beside her companion. Melanie standing a few feet away with her calm, unreadable expression. My heart pounded, but not with rage. With clarity. When I finally spoke, my voice was steady. I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. Anniversaries are supposed to be reminders of what we've built together, of how far we've come. I paused, glancing at Lindsay. Her smile flickered, the corners of her mouth twitching nervously. But sometimes anniversaries remind us of something else. That time doesn't just build, it also reveals. It reveals what we've ignored, what we've denied, and what we've been too afraid to face. A hush fell over the room. Glasses lowered. Forks paused midair. I won't stand here and pretend that the woman beside me is the same woman I once promised everything to. She isn't. Somewhere along the way, she chose a different path. And tonight, in front of all of you, I saw it for what it really is. The words were not shouted. I didn't accuse or scream, but each one landed with the precision of a blade. People shifted in their seats. Someone near the back gasped softly. Lindsay's face drained of color. Her hand trembled as she set down her glass, eyes darting toward the man at her side, who was now staring at the floor as though wishing to vanish. He tried to step back into the shadows, but the damage was done. His presence had already carved the truth into the night. I continued, marriage isn't only about the smiles we show in public. It's about what we do when no one is watching. And what I've learned is that the truth doesn't stay hidden forever. Eventually, it shows itself whether we want it to or not. I lowered the microphone slightly, letting the silence stretch again. It wasn't theatrical. It was necessary. In the quiet, the truth hung heavier than any accusation could. The guests looked from me to Lindsay, their expressions a mixture of pity, shock, and discomfort. The celebration had turned into a reckoning, and there was no going back. Lindsay tried to speak then, her voice breaking through the tension. "That's not," she began, but the words caught in her throat. She glanced desperately at the man, but he had already stepped away, his shoulders slumped, his confidence gone. He blended into the background like a shadow retreating from the light. For the first time all evening, Lindsay was alone. I set the microphone back on the table and stepped away, leaving the words hanging in the air. I didn't need to say more. The guests had seen enough, heard enough. The illusion of our marriage had shattered before their eyes, and nothing could piece it back together. Melanie's gaze followed me, calm and steady. She didn't move to my side, didn't make the moment about herself. She simply stood as a quiet witness, her presence a reminder that there were still people in the world who valued truth, who didn't need to cloak themselves in lies. As I walked past Lindsay, I caught the look in her eyes. Panic, desperation. For so long, she had been the one in control, weaving stories, managing appearances, deciding what version of herself to show. Now, stripped bare in front of everyone, she had nothing left to hide behind. The turning point wasn't loud. It wasn't explosive. It didn't need to be. The real devastation was in the calmness of it, in the quiet certainty that everything she had tried to protect had already slipped away. From that moment on, the night belonged not to her lies, but to the truth I had finally spoken aloud. And though the room filled with whispers, though the celebration dissolved into awkward murmurs and sidelong glances, I felt lighter than I had in months, because the weight was no longer mine to carry. When the guests left, Lindsay appeared at my door, her dress wrinkled, her mascara streaked. She begged, words tumbling with desperation, trying to convince me the night hadn't meant what it looked like. But the house felt foreign to her now. The keys still fit, but she no longer belonged inside. The walls that once sheltered us together had turned into silent witnesses of betrayal she couldn't erase. Weeks passed, and I understood her infidelity had beg asterisk and long before our anniversary. That night only unmasked it. I stripped the house of remnants of her, reclaiming space as my own. I began writing again, pouring words where silence had rotted me. Melanie wasn't a savior but a reminder that respect still exists. Now, when I see my reflection, I no longer see a man undone by betrayal, but one rebuilt, standing stronger amid the ruins she left behind.